So, hello everybody. My name is Paul Scorpin, and I'm in my seminar room here in Untitled, Germany, in Bavaria. And today's Palm Sunday here and everywhere. And many of us are familiar with the Christian calendar that Palm Sunday is 1 week before Easter Sunday, and the great mystery is that on Palm Sunday, when Jesus comes into the old city of Jerusalem, he is greeted by children who lay down their clothes and palm branches, and it's a question why 7 days later, or Friday, he's going to be then crucified in the old city. And a lot of us know that there's actually two Jerusalems. There's one in the Middle East, which is the earthly Jerusalem, which has been long since a city of division and contention. It's a home, or it's the three monotheistic religions are there, and for them it's a holy city. For the Jews with the Wailing Wall, for the Christians with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and for the Muslims the Dome of the Rock, where Muhammad took the night ride and went up into the heavens. It's my spiritual home. I've been there with my wife, and I were married there, and I've been there over 50 times, and I lead tours there. So on Palm Sunday today, why is he celebrated and only to be crucified 5 days later? It's because the other Jerusalem is the heavenly Jerusalem, which is considered to be on another plane, and the heavenly Jerusalem, as described in the book of Revelations by John, is a city where there is no temple, there's no church. I mean, there were no churches back then. And it is completely undivided, and that's the heart chakra, okay? And the reason why I wanted to give this talk today and then post it later on YouTube or on Vimeo is that one thing that's been going through my thought processes, and also when I'm sleeping, is this idea of innocence and what that means to our time that we're sharing now, because many of us are aware that we're going through a massive paradigm shift now. And there's a lot of positive stuff going on, and there's also a lot of stuff which is quite frightening. They call it the counterforce is very active, but the counterforce is only doing the new consciousness a favor, because it's forcing the new consciousness to define itself. So even with people like Trump and people like Theresa May and other people who are going into fear and encouraging us go into fear and hate, they're actually doing us a favor, because they're allowing us to look at what we really want. And I want to talk today, like I said, about innocence, because Jesus put he placed a lot of importance on innocence. He said, for example, I'm sending you out into the wolves, and you should be as shrewd as a serpent, and as innocent as a dove. Okay, and I've been thinking a lot about Daskalos, Stylianos Ateshlis, whom some of you must know or may know, who passed away about 21, 22 years. And I had the very, very good fortune, the blessing of many lives, that when I arrived in Cyprus in 1989, I was invited to stay and work with Daskalos, and I ended up spending the last 6 years of his life with him as his assistant and as probably his closest student, and traveling with him to Germany. That's why I'm here, because I met my wife here when I was here in 1991 with Daskalos, and also to America with Daskalos, and to Brazil and so forth. And recently in this room, I've been working with a group of people going into the Gospel of Thomas. And we actually did a film in German, which will be released soon, where we enacted the Gospel of Thomas. We had somebody playing Jesus and playing Marie Magdalena, and it was quite an extraordinary, project, and it required that myself and some of the main actors go into the Gospel of Thomas just a couple of weeks before we filmed, that we could bring the proper energy into the film. It's easy to read the Gospel of Thomas, but it's very hard to know with what temper or what tone Jesus presented some of these the 114 sayings. Excuse me, I have a little bit of an allergy. We know from the canonical Gospels that Jesus said that only children will come into the kingdom of heavens. And that is baffling, but it has a lot to do with what I want to say today. Children, when they're born, even if you believe in reincarnation and you believe in the law of karma, they are absolutely innocent. Because even if they have a karmic history which may not be so innocent or perceived as innocent, that only comes into them later, unless, of course, they're unfortunate enough to be born with a handicap or some limitation. So children for us are a symbol of innocence, as are many animals and so forth. Why? Well, because children are not divided. In other words, most children don't walk until they're 1 year old, and even after they stand up and start to walk, they only become aware later that they are going to be a girl or a boy. So the sexuality is not at all active in a child, or gender identification is not active in a child, and that by itself is attributed to innocence. And furthermore, our society, our culture, places a lot of value on the intellect, and we have clearly a major problem with emotions. Emotions are considered secondary to thoughts and ideas and principles. Emotions are considered to be very human, whereby principles and ideas are considered to be more universal. That means that we actually divide the upper body from the lower body. The school system does that, the family does that in the first experience, and then the school system does it, and then also religions do a great job at doing that, because religions have a hard time with the lower chakras, with the lower part of the body. Very difficult time with sexuality, very difficult time with fear and shame and guilt, and they become very puritanical. Religions have grown extremely puritanical over the last 2,000 years because they have a hard time with life in general, and they are basically life-denying religions. So we have that division that takes place when we start to become a young adult. The lower body becomes somewhat complicated, and the upper body becomes somewhat praised or valued. Especially when we go the path of the school and then the universities, where we value reason tremendously. And I just want to read you a couple of things about from the Gospel of Thomas. This was actually a book that Daskalos was given as a present, and Daskalos gave me. Daskalos was not a big fan of Thomas. He said this is written by Thomas, but that Thomas has too much of Thomas's character. But if we take, for example, Logan, they're called Logans, number 4, and it reads, number 4. A man old in days will not hesitate to ask a little child of 7 days about the place of life, and then he'll live forever. So already this is the 4th Logan in the Gospel of Thomas, and it is telling you that a child of 7 days old is much more in truth and integration and in God than a man very old in days, because a child of 7 days old is not divided, okay? And that means he's completely innocent. Division within us between the upper and the lower, between the male and the female, and between the inside and the outside, I'm going to read you something shortly afterwards, makes us very clever and it takes away our innocence, okay? Nothing wrong with that per se, but it does make us very complicated. It creates a number of divisions within us which we have to then manage. Somebody told me recently that the Jews and also the Christians now, it was typical at the time of Christ that you would circumcise a young boy on the 8th day. And so it could be that that's why it said a child of 7 days, because once a child undergoes circumcision, which is an extremely painful process, you already created deep injury in the genitalia, and then therefore a division between, related to sexuality and which you're going to carry on for your whole life. And then if we just read a little bit more, we come to number 22. And 22 is probably the core of the Gospel of Thomas, and maybe even the core of what Christ wanted for religion, for Christianity. So it reads, I'll just read it to you. You can look it up yourselves, but it says, Jesus saw children who were being suckled, breastfed. And he says to his disciples, these children who are being suckled are like those who enter the kingdom. And then the apostles say to him, shall we then, being children, enter the kingdom? And Jesus says to them, when you make the two one, and when you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, and the above as the below, and when you make male and female into a single one, that there will be no more male, and the female will no longer be female, and so on and so on. Then you come into the kingdom of heavens. Okay, so in that Logan in the Gospel of Thomas is an absolute confirmation that this division takes place in us. The lower from the upper, the inside from the outside, because we have two selves then which have to manage this division. The right from the left, even the right hemisphere of the brain from the left hemisphere of the brain, and also this massive gender split that takes place in us. It takes away our innocence, okay? It removes us from innocence. And I wanted to share with you something that I'm currently writing a book about my time with Daskalos, before and after, and my time with Daskalos. And I spent the last couple of years reflecting on some things that I experienced with Daskalos. When I reached Daskalos, I was a 28-year-old young man, fairly naive, and since Daskalos passed over and I landed in Munich, and myself am now work as a healer and also as a teacher of spirituality all over Europe and also in America. Then I've been, every day I study consciousness, and every day I work on people who are struggling with consciousness and health, emotional and physical, and I'm keeping a close tab on what's going on in us. And because now I'm in my middle 50s, and my time with Daskalos is going back into the past, I'm able to better understand who he was now than I was then. I've come to believe that the reason why the apostles wrote the Gospels so long after the crucifixion was because they had to develop themselves to be able to understand what an incredible mystic and healer and seer that Jesus was. You can only when you go in that path can you understand what you witnessed in your youth. So Daskalos was a man of very few needs, very few. He was a pensioner who had spent his life working in His Majesty's printing house in Nicosia, Cyprus. And from that he received a pension which was enough to support himself and also to support his family if they needed help. Once Daskalos became well known, reluctantly, he didn't want to become well known, but it was of course a gift to humanity. But he became well known because of a university professor of mine, Kyriakos Markides, wrote the first book, the Magus of Strovolos, about him. And then the second book and the third book and other books. Then people were flocking to Daskalos to see this Magus and this mystic. As I said, Daskalos had very little needs at all, and people wanted to support Daskalos. They wanted to give him money, and he said, "Don't give me money. I have no need for money. But if you want to make a gift, there's a home on the road from Larnaca to Ayia. That's on the easterly side of the island, which I support. Daskalos supported, and it was a home for emotionally retarded. That may not be political correct anymore to say that. Emotionally undeveloped adults who were physically handicapped and were basically behaved like children. I forget what you call that now in English. Back in my days in the States, you would say they were emotionally retarded or handicapped. And Daskalos, I think he founded this home, and he asked people then to make a gift to the home. And a couple of times during my tenure with Daskalos, he would say, "Can we go and visit the home?" And we set aside a day to make the drive. It was about an hour and a half drive from Nicosia, Strovolos, to the home. And I remember very clearly that on the morning that we all got into the car, Panayota, his daughter, and myself and Daskalos, Daskalos was extremely jubilant. More than usual. He was always in a good mood, but he was extremely excited. And en route there, his mood would only get better and better. And when we reached the home, he would be the first one, even at 80, to jump out of the car and go to the entrance of the home. And the director of the home knew we were coming and greeted him. And behind him were, if I remember correctly, 20 or 30 of these people who lived there. And they knew that Daskalos was coming, who they only saw maybe once or twice a year. And they clung to him. They clung to him. And he would go into the room, find an armchair to sit down, and all of these people would come and sit around Daskalos in ecstasy. And he was in ecstasy. And they couldn't communicate very much because their speech was retarded, but they enjoyed these hours together tremendously. And being a normal human being, when I walked into the home, I remember very clearly folding my arms like this, protecting my solar plexus, because we all know that these souls caught in these limited personalities, that they can be very emotional and even maybe sexual, and we have to protect ourselves from them. So I would close myself down and I would watch Daskalos and just wonder what was going on there. And then after a while we'd say, Daskalos, you know, we have to get back to Nicosia, it's getting late, can we go? And he'd say, can't we just stay another hour? And we said, sure, and then we stayed another hour, and then finally, as the sunset came on, he would say, okay, it's time to go. And then it was with some pain and some sadness that he would then separate from these people, and he would separate from them. And then we made the long trip home, and Daskalos was then solemn, as if he was missing something. And I remember one time returning back to his home in Strovolos, we reached the house, parked in front of the house, and on the porch, or the entrance of Daskalos' house, sat a man who was very elegant, with gray hair, an elderly man. And Daskalos got out of the car, and the man said, Mr. Teshelis, my name is so-and-so. I was wondering if we could have a talk. And Daskalos said, Daskalos never said no, so he said yes, and then the man started talking and said, you know, Daskalos, I was 7 years in Tibet, I was 12 years in South India with this guru and that guru, I was down in South America with this shaman, and I have written this book, and I thought we could exchange wisdom with each other. And you know what Daskalos did? Daskalos went like this to protect himself, because, and now I know, at the home for these handicapped adults, Daskalos was in the company of absolute innocence. And on his porch was a man who was maybe very kind, extremely wise, no doubt, but extremely complicated, as we all are. And Daskalos needed then to protect himself against this complication. And they went in and had a talk, and it probably went very well, and Daskalos probably was very patient with the man. And now, 17, 18 years later, I know why that is because Daskalos was in the Christ consciousness. And he embodied an innocence which was unbelievable. Daskalos was probably the most innocent man you can imagine, person you can imagine. He was absolutely in the present now. His past was no burden to him anymore. The future was of no interest to him. Because he was enjoying every minute, which you do when you're undivided, okay? When there is no longer two selves, where there is no split between the left and the right, and maybe even the male and the female, and the up and the down. And in that sense, where are we now? Where are we now collectively around the entire world is, it's a time to heal division, okay? It's a time to heal division outside, between the religions, between the cultures, between political factions. It's a time to heal divisions between the male and the female, and it's time to heal divisions between the younger generation, the older generation, and it's time to heal divisions within ourselves. It starts with us, okay? And being a student of mysticism and spirituality for the last 40 years or more, I remember taking part in exchanges with many very wise people who all posed the question, what is primary? Absolute power, absolute wisdom, or absolute love? So mystics in the East and in the West, when they seek to prescribe qualities to the Godhead, to the Source, they all say that the Godhead, the source of us all, has to be absolutely powerful. The great German mystic, Meister Eckhart, said, God is so powerful that the effort it takes for us to turn an apple in our hands, God can turn the whole universe in his hands. Okay? So God is clearly powerful. God is all loving, compassionate. Jesus said that, my Father is love, and so forth. And God is all knowing. Okay? And the reason why Jesus is so attractive to so many of us is because Jesus had these three qualities in absolute balance. Jesus was extremely wise. He knew what was in the heart of every human. He was extremely powerful. He could dematerialize. He did a number of times. He could raise people from the dead. He could cure people from leprosy and so forth. And he was extremely loving. And one of the reasons why Daskalos was so attractive to us all was Daskalos took Jesus as his role model and developed a spiritual life which brought Daskalos into this absolute love. He was extremely loving, extremely wise, and extremely powerful. So there's been an exchange between a lot of my friends, a great mystic in Denmark who is no longer with us, Asger Lorentzen, who exchanged letters with a friend of mine from back in the days of Cyprus who lives in Mount Shasta, a yogi. What is more primary? Power, love, or wisdom? And I reached peace with this myself by believing they need each other. You cannot be love without wisdom, and power is weak. It's useless. And wisdom without love and without power is empty, and power without love, and so of course they need each other. But then recently now, with looking at where we're standing now and the divisions that we experience within ourselves and between ourselves, you can put wisdom and love and power by the side, and you can say that probably the highest quality that we are and will be is absolute innocence. We will be as wise, as shrewd as serpents, but as innocent as doves. So we will regain our innocence that Adam and Eva lost so many moons ago, coupled with a self-awareness and a self-knowing and what's called the I am consciousness. Okay, so the solution is not to become childlike. That we were. The solution or the way is to retrieve our childness coupled with our consciousness. Okay? A child suckling on the breast of the mother is not self-conscious. Adam and Eva in the Garden of Eden were not self-conscious. They gained self-consciousness through life. And now it's the time that we've done that too in the last 2,300 years. A lot of us have been working on gaining self-consciousness, self-awareness of structures in us, and now is a time that we can bring, if you say this is innocence, belonging to the left side of the body, because it's relatively, innocence is passive, and essentially at some level female, and this is then the I am consciousness. That's the time for them to come together within us. We are allowed to let go of conflict. We are allowed to let go of division, and we are allowed to come into this innocence. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And there's another passage in the Gospel of Tom which speaks volumes to us. The whole Gospel of Thomas speaks volumes to us. If you haven't read it, please do. Where Jesus says, I don't know where it is right off the top of the bat, but Jesus said, the kingdom of heavens is like activity and rest. activity and rest. Activity and rest. And I ask you, who is watching this talk, do you have that balance? Do I have that balance? Activity, we know. We are trained from the moment we're born to be active. I teach in my healing education here, I teach in my healing education that the healer, like Daskalos, like Jesus, they were primarily passive. I teach here endlessly in my healing education that if you want to be a healer, then become like a riverbed. A riverbed is passive and it allows the river to flow through it. Passivity is not easy to learn. You cannot try to be passive. Rest is not easy to learn. And now the unique offer of our time is that we're going to be able to learn to be able to be active without conflict, without egoism, coupled with a chance to rest and rebuild and meditate and pray in balance. And that balance will come about when we allow ourselves to become innocent again. So I just wanted to share that with whoever is out there who's ever following my work or who's ever interested in Daskalos' work. Daskalos, as I said, a lot of people at the end, including Markides and others, they went against Daskalos, partly because he withdrew from Arevna. This is a political thing, I don't want to go into this, but I know that when somebody is risen to that state of innocence, we become jealous and envious of where they are, because we have a longing to be there ourselves, and we become extremely skeptical. And when somebody's behaving as integrated and as innocent as Daskalos was 24 hours a day, then we doubt it, and we say, no, he's got his shadow. He's hiding his shadow. And the reason why we do that is because we are jealous. We want to be there too. And Daskalos said to me, he said to me, Paul, when I leave, you have to promise me something. And I said, what is it, Daskalos? He said, never protect my name. You never have to protect me. And as soon as Daskalos passed over, what did I do? I decided I had to protect his name. With Daskalos, there's nothing to protect because there is no ego. I know that now. Okay. Anyhow, I could go on for hours, and I would just like to. I just felt like posting that today. It's a beautiful day here in Bavaria, beautiful, beautiful spring day, and I wish you all a beautiful Palm Sunday and a beautiful Easter week, going into Easter Sunday and the resurrection, and then as we come into Pentecost, and this is a very, very nice time of year, very sacred. And it's a good time to let go of structures. So I send my blessings to you all, and I thank you for taking your time to listen to this. And God bless you. And God bless your innocence.